Alright, what is going on guys? It is Benny, and today I have the ultimate Mortar tutorial for you guys in Clash Royale. And in this video, we cover everything you need to know about Mortar, whether it's how to pick your deck, how to build a Mortar deck, all of the specific card placements, how to beat hard counters, and much more. So if you are looking for something specific, feel free to use the timeline I put down below. And if you guys did enjoy this, I would really appreciate it if you guys could leave a like and maybe a comment to let me know. But at the end of the day, I honestly just hope you guys found this really helpful. So without further ado, let's just get right into it. Now to start us off, let's talk about the different Mortar deck types, and I'm going to talk about which one you guys should play based on your playstyle. For the first one, we're going to talk about Mortar Cycle, and this one's pretty simple. If you're a patient player and you're okay with learning how to play patiently and not go super aggressive, then Mortar Cycle is likely going to be the best option for you. It's not a super aggressive offensive deck, it's a very high skilled defensive deck. One thing that I will say is if you're going to play a deck like Mortar Cycle, then you need to be comfortable learning a lot of the very specific interactions, because this deck, the most important thing isn't being aggressive, it's knowing card placements and having interactions memorized. There's a lot of different interactions that you're going to want to know when you're playing this deck, but the main ones are going to be King Tower activation and your offensive tornado. So for King Tower activation against cards like Hog Rider, you're just going to play your tornado right here, and it's going to be a very easy King Tower activation. You can even just wait for the Hog Rider to come in, get one hit on the tower, and then you go ahead, pop that tornado down, and you'll get that King Tower activation. For the offensive tornado, the placement's going to depend on where they place their card, but usually you're going to want to try to pull it back and into the opposite lane of where your mortar is. So if I go ahead and play my mortar here, and then my opponent tries to kite my mortar just like this, I'm going to go ahead and take the tornado and I'm going to pull that card back and out of range of my mortar. Now my mortar's locked onto the tower and I'm able to get some easy damage. Now the next deck type that I'm going to talk about is Mortarbait. Mortarbait is the perfect medium between all of the Mortar deck types. It's a little bit more spammy, so you can offensively pressure your opponents, but you can also play very strong defense. And the most difficult thing about Mortarbait is learning when to be aggressive and when not to be. But this is great for people who kind of play a balanced Clash Royale game. They don't have to learn all of the perfect interactions, but they learn a couple tricks with this deck, and they're able to play defense and offense. There's less tips that I can show you guys right off the bat, like how I did with Mortar Cycle, but a couple things that are really important to know is if you play your Skeleton Barrel right here, it's going to avoid a building placed in the opposite lane and get on your opponent's tower. So if you go ahead and if you're pushing this left side here, and then your opponent plays a building in the middle, if you play your Skeleton Barrel right here at the bridge in this far corner, it's going to get to the Princess Tower. Otherwise, if they don't have a building, you can go ahead and just play it anywhere at the bridge here. Another important thing to remember is Spear Goblins can get good damage on their own, and sometimes they'll get more damage than a mortar shot, so don't sleep on your Spear Goblins. And lastly, make sure that you're splitting up your pushes and you're not giving a ton of log value, so I don't want to see you playing all of your bait cards in one lane and not pressuring both lanes at the same time. Now the last deck type that I'm going to talk about is the more expensive mortar decks. This one, for example, is 3.9 Elixir. And these decks are great for people who don't like to necessarily have perfect card placement or play a lot of cards in a match. With these types of decks, you're not going to be pulling cards or playing really structured defense, but you're going to be more calculated with how you play your cards, and you're going to be going for more beatdown type of pushes. Not beatdown pushes as in traditional golem pushes, but more expensive pushes that are heavy and get you the win. So what about people who like to make their own mortar decks? I'm going to show you guys a really simple and easy way to understand how to make your own homemade mortar deck. Almost every single mortar deck has the same foundational 4 cards. You need to obviously have your mortar, and then almost every other mortar deck has some type of win condition, whether it's a second evo that they can get chip damage from, or it's a whole other win condition like Hog Rider or something else. Then you're going to need to make sure that you always have a tank in your mortar deck. This can be Skeleton King, it can be Valkyrie, it can be Knight, it can be whatever you want, or it can be more expensive like something like Goblinstein. Lastly, you need to have a ranged card. This can be Dark Goblin, it can be Musketeer, it can be Cannon card, it can be whatever you want and however expensive you want, but you need to have at least one ranged card. Then typically every single mortar deck has at least one spell, and if it's going to be one spell, it needs to be arrows. Or it's going to be 2 spells, in which I would recommend whichever spells you like for those 2 spells. Lastly, you need to have 2 support cards, and this can be whatever you want. It doesn't have to be a spammy card, but I would recommend that at least one of the cards targets air in some way, whether it's a card like Minions or it's a card like Spear Goblins or something else. When you go through a website like Royale API, you can definitely see how there's always going to be those same foundational cards, but you can mess around with anything you want. Take a look at this Hog Earthquake deck, for example. There's 2 win conditions, which is Mortar and Hog, 2 spells, ranged card, a tank, and then the supporting cards. And that's going to be the same for almost every single mortar deck. So you can go ahead and make a mortar deck out of literally anything you want. You can go ahead and put Mortar E-Giant together if you want. As long as you guys follow these tips, you're going to build solid mortar decks, and you're going to be able to follow everything I talk about in this video. You guys can use any deck you want, and I promise you the placements and everything will always be the same, and this video will help you. So without further ado, let's go ahead and talk about the mortar placements now. First thing that we're going to go over is going to be your offensive mortar placement, and if you've been watching me for a while, you probably have this ingrained into your head already, but I think it's really important that you master this and get this down, because this is going to be the foundation of playing mortar. Right off the back, when you're going to be playing your best mortar placement, it's going to be here at the bridge, and ideally in a perfect world with nothing considered, you want to play it one tile back from the bridge and then one tile to the right. However, I see a lot of people try to do this and then they end up playing their mortar back here by accident. So as long as you're playing at the bridge here, you're making the right play. Now there's a couple reasons for playing your mortar here, but the biggest reason for this is the fact that your opponent can't kite your mortar as easily. You're going to see here that about half of the arena, or at least 3/4 of the arena, isn't covered by the mortar's range. In comparison, if you play it somewhere over here, it's almost a guarantee for your opponent to kite your mortar every single time when they play a card. The other reason why it's important to play your mortar here at the bridge and one tile back is so that you have tower support here. On top of having tower support, you're able to funnel your opponent's counters into the same lane, and so it's much easier to defend your mortar and get lots of value from your supporting cards in this position. Now, an exception to playing your mortar at the bridge is if you're playing an opponent who has a card that gets pulled by the mortar. So for example, if you're playing against Hog Rider, Giant, or E-Giant, sometimes you actually might want to play the mortar up here. This is a great way to spread your cards out so that your opponent can't get both your mortar and your ranged troops, and you're also going to get some offense on the opponent's tower there. In this push here, I'm able to use my mortar just to pull that last little bit of HP from that E-Giant, and my opponent can only play the lightning on the mortar and not get my tower. Lastly, you can play your mortar here at the bridge and one tile forward if your opponent has a spell like Fireball, so that they can't get value on both the mortar and the tower at the same time. Now that we've got that down, let's go ahead and talk about how and when we're going to play a defensive mortar. When you're playing a defensive mortar, you want to play it right here in the middle, either to the left or to the right of center. As long as you're in this general area in the middle, you're going to have good placement, and you can play it to the left or right of the center depending on the card your opponent is playing. When you have your defensive mortar down, it's very important that you're playing your ranged card in the right spot, and that can either be here to the side of your tower depending on if they have a spell like lightning or if they have fireball or poison, and if they don't, then you're going to play it somewhere down here or to the right of your mortar when they have their push coming in. Then you're going to take your tank and you're going to play it anywhere up here as needed to help pull everything they have behind, and you can even go ahead and play it down here and pull towards your opposite side tower. This push here is a great example of how you want to try to defend with mortar. I have my Ice Wizard to the left of my tower and out of range of lightning. Then I have my mortar in the middle, and I'm playing my support cards to deal with everything else he's playing to back up his push, while letting my Princess Tower and my Ice Wizard delete his entire push, and I have a counter push going in. So really quickly, now that we know how to place a defensive mortar, let's talk about when to do it. And I want you guys to look at this example here. You're going to see the defensive mortar helps take a card like Barbarians out very well. It's great against a swarm lower HP cards. In comparison, when it's up against a card like P.E.K.K.A, the mortar almost contributes nothing, and that elixir is probably going to be spent better off on something else. So if you're going to play a defensive mortar, make sure you're doing it with a purpose. Other times you're going to want to play that defensive mortar is to pull their building targeting cards. You're going to see here how I pull that Goblin Giant towards both towers, and I have my ranged card down low so that I can have a counter push eventually after defending. Playing a mortar with a purpose defensively can also mean pulling a card like Hog Rider up high. You're going to see here I have both an offensive placement to get some damage on the tower, and I defended the Hog Rider. This mortar placement is also really helpful for dealing with your opponent's annoying tower targeting cards. For example, you can pull Suspicious Bush and Skeleton Barrel, or even Wall Breakers, using this mortar placement, and then you have to play less cards to counter their entire push there. So now that we have the placements down, let's go ahead and let's talk about how to generate offense with your mortar. So when it comes to generating offense with your mortar, there's a couple different ways, but one standard push that will always be the same and is really easy to do as long as you master is going to be what I call the fundamental mortar push. So in order to do that, all you do is you start your ranged card in the back into the same lane that they're attacking. Then watch my elixir as it starts to get a little bit closer to being at 10. I wait a little bit, then I play my mortar right here, and then I play my tank in front. And then I have a ranged card, a mortar card, and a tank in front of my mortar. There's a reason why I call this your foundational push, and that's because your defense also relies heavily on this format. You're going to see here I play my tank to take out the Royal Ghost, and I have the ranged card behind. Now I can go for a counter push with my mortar and generate some offense. Other ways you can play your mortar is you can go ahead and you can use one of your cycle cards or your second win conditions just like this, and then you can go ahead and play an alone mortar like this. But it's really important that when you play an alone mortar like this, you're not predicting something in front, you're playing it and then you're being reactionary, so you see what they use to counter it. This is something that I love to do when I'm in double elixir. You'll see there I have my mortar on one side, and I'm not spamming a ton of cards with it at the start, I'm waiting to see what he plays. And I have my skeleton barrel in the opposite lane, and my opponent quickly loses control, and now I can choose my lane to start spamming it, which is the left one. I'm not over defending my initial mortar, I'm just seeing what they play in response, and then I get the win because of that. As you're building up momentum, let's pretend that you have your mortar here and your opponent is playing counters. Then you're going to start to play your ranged card higher up here to defend the mortar and keep the pressure on your opponent. By playing the ranged card up here, even if your opponent plays a card to kite or distract your mortar, you're going to stop them from being able to get a lot of value out of it because your musketeer or ranged card will target it earlier. The last way that you can play your mortar is by predicting your opponent's counters, but I would only do this if your opponent has done this consistently. So here I play my tank a second after playing my mortar to counter the building. I would do this if you see your opponent using their building consistently to defend your mortar, but only then. Keep in mind, if you mess up this prediction, it's you who's going to be punished. I just want to reiterate, a lot of the time I play my mortar, especially at the start of the match, and I don't play anything else to support it. It is very important that you're not spamming on your mortar right at the start of the match, and you're instead reacting to what your opponent plays. This is because it's super important that you know what your opponent is using to counter your mortar and slowly building up your momentum throughout the match. You're not going to win off of a one trick when you're playing with mortar. Instead, you're going to win by playing smart and playing slow and figuring your opponent out. If you guys want the outline or the strategy that I would recommend, this is what it would be. First mortar, you're not playing super aggressive and you're not predicting anything. You're just simply playing that mortar and seeing what they play in response and even letting that mortar go down without prioritizing a ton of offense. Then eventually you're going to get to the point where now you can play a more aggressive mortar and you know what your opponent's counters are. So you're going to go ahead and try to counter their cards as soon as possible and get as much value out of that mortar as you can. You'll see there, I log that Dark Goblin, I'm keeping that mortar alive and I'm reacting to what my opponent is playing. Then as the game goes on, you can afford to be more aggressive, and this is where you might start to either throw your second win condition opposite lane or go ahead and try to predict things in front of your mortar. But again, you're doing that later in the game. So you start off slow, not defending the mortar that much, then you gradually start to defend your mortar more, and then eventually as the game goes on, you can start to go for those predictions and try to really pressure your opponent by playing your second win condition or coming up with different types of pushes to pressure your opponent and get the win. Now really quickly, I want to talk about the supporting cards that you guys might be using in your mortar decks, specifically with heroes and champions. And the biggest mistake I see people make with their heroes and champions is they actually underuse their ability. Oftentimes people don't use the ability to their advantage, and it's a big mistake. So when it comes to a card like Skeleton King, I'm going to tell you guys that you should pop that ability almost no matter what, as long as the ability is charged above half. As long as you're near or above half, you can pop that ability and you're likely going to get value unless they have something like a Valkyrie down. Same thing goes for Hero Knight. If you have your Hero Knight above half HP and you have a push going, it's probably going to be a good idea to pop that Hero Knight ability. Obviously though, use a little bit of nuance. If you don't think you're going to get literally anything, or if it's a complete waste, don't do it. Now other notable examples are going to be Archer Queen, Golden Knight, and Hero Musketeer. And of course I can't talk about every hero and champion in this video. If I could, I would, but that's going to take forever and I don't think everybody's going to watch that. However, you can use your best judgment for a lot of this and apply these lessons to any hero or champion you're using. Both the Archer Queen and the Golden Knight, you're going to want to pop that ability no matter what. It is always going to be worth it, and these two cards are actually heavily reliant on you popping the ability for them to be good. For Hero Musketeer, I would go ahead and play your ability whenever you know they can't counter it with a big spell or a splash card like Valkyrie or Mega Knight or something like that. As long as you're getting over 3 elixir in value out of that turret, it's going to be worth popping. The last champion that I'm going to talk about is going to be your Little Prince, and you're going to pop that ability whenever you need a tank in front of your Little Prince or your Mortar. You're also going to use it to help take out spam cards as needed. Now of course, depending on when you're watching this video, these tips might change a little bit. Certain cards are going to come in and out of the meta, that's just natural. But I think the big takeaway from this is going to be that you need to make sure that you're using your hero and champion abilities and don't underuse them. So now let's go ahead and let's talk about hard counters to mortar decks. Now I'm not going to talk about decks that are easy to counter if there's one card you swap. For example, E-Drag is terrible to play against when you're using mortar. But if you put either lightning or rocket in your deck, then all of a sudden it's very easy to counter E-Drag. So if you're playing situations like that, go ahead and just make those easy swaps. Instead, I'm going to talk about decks that are hard to play against, like Hog Earthquake or Monk. So when you're up against Hog Earthquake, it's really important that you're slow pushing and that you're relying on your second win condition. For example, see how I started my cannon cart in the back here. That stopped him from being able to play his Royal Hogs into the same lane as my push. Then I'm going to go ahead and play my Mortar Graveyard, and obviously Mortar Graveyard is a little bit better to get damage against Hog Earthquake just because, you know, it's a very strong second win condition, but I'm relying on that second win condition and I'm starting all of my cards in the back in the same lane that they're playing their Royal Hogs. That's super important because if you try to play a Mortar into the same lane that they're trying to push, they're always going to get Earthquake value. So instead you need to rely on the other cards in your deck. Watch how my opponent tries to go opposite lane with his Royal Hogs here, but because I built up a slow push on that opposite lane, he's not able to both defend and go aggressive, and that's something that Royal Hogs really struggles with. They can't play two lanes at the same time. I actually end up 3-crowning this opponent all because he tried to go in 2 lanes. Now the next hard counter is going to be Monk Royal Giant, and honestly this is an annoying deck no matter what, and it's a hard matchup to play. But if I were you, one thing I would really try to do is constantly go opposite lane aggressively if they play their Monk in the back. The other thing is you want to try to pull that Monk behind the Royal Giant so that your Princess Tower and your ranged cards can lock onto the Royal Giant just like this. So now to end off the video, I'm going to do a live match and incorporate everything that I was talking about with Mortar, and also I'm going to talk about some specific tips and tricks. Now for my first play, I'm just going to play safe and I'm going to cycle my Goblin gang in the back to have a safe first play and not spend a ton of elixir. I'll defend this Barb Barrel just because, and then I'm going to go ahead, and now that we know that he has a Witch there, I'm going to play my defensive Mortar. One thing I also really want to talk to you guys about is the fact that it's really important that you take out your opponent's annoying cards with your spells or with whatever you have. So for example, Firecracker is a really difficult card to play against, so I'm going to Fireball a Firecracker every single time. And you want to try to think that way in every single matchup. What's your opponent's hardest card to counter for you? And then is there an easy way for you to counter it so that it doesn't get a lot of value? Another good example of this might be Dark Goblin or Goblin Barrel against Logbait, which I think a lot of people know. So you want to try to think that way as much as you can. Now I'm going to defend this Valkyrie here, and I'll have my Hero Knight right there, and then I'm able to build up a little bit more of a push, and I'll play my Mortar because I have the Hero Knight there to support it, and I'm not going to play anything else. And then if I want to defend that Mortar and be a little bit more aggressive, I'm going to play my ranged card up here. But because he played that Barb Barrel, I know that I'm not going to get a lot of damage out of that Mortar, so instead I'm going to play my Hero Musketeer down low so that I can maybe build it up for a second push later on. I'm going to Barb Barrel there just to take out the Hero Witch, and then I'm going to go ahead and play my Skeleton Barrel here, build up some offense, and have a tiny bit of a push. Now I'm going to go ahead and pop that Hero Musketeer turret down there just because I had a push going in, and I know that I'll get a little bit of value out of that turret there. Now I'll play my Spear Goblins because that's the cheapest counter I have to Valkyrie, and I can defend that Valkyrie and have a bit of a counter push, and then I'm going to wait a little bit because I know I've spent a decent amount of elixir, and so I want to be safe. He just went for an alone graveyard there, which was a ton of elixir, and then he's going to hit me with the vines, which was a horrible play. So I'm going to go ahead and play my EvoMortar left side because I know he doesn't have a ton of elixir to be able to stop me from getting that lock on the tower, and I'll even defend that EvoMortar just because I know I have such an elixir advantage here. I'll go ahead and play my Evo Skeleton Barrel right behind, and he's going to go for the Evo Valk, so I'm not going to get a ton of damage out of that Skeleton Barrel to take the tower, but we will actually get a decent amount of damage. I'm going to be honest, I did not expect to get that much damage that we just got there. He's going to go for the Graveyard, which is a hard deck to play against, so I'm going to spread all of my counters out here. I played the Goblin Gang a little bit further back so that the Spear Goblins stay out of range, and he's not able to get a ton of value with that poison and get that poison down quick enough to stop us from defending that Graveyard. Now I'm going to go ahead and just Fireball that tower because I know we have an elixir advantage. We might as well get rid of that tower as soon as we can. Then I'm going to go ahead and play the Musketeer right here at the bridge so that I can kind of defend everything but have it low enough that it can help out with the Graveyard. Now we're going to spread our counters out so that he can't get all of them down with one spell, and we are going to defend that Graveyard. We can even just go for the Barb Barrel to be safe, and that's going to be a win. Now thank you so much for watching, guys. I hope this tutorial was helpful. Please leave a like and subscribe if you did enjoy this, and I can't wait to see you guys in the next video.